Okay, so let me kick this on for everybody. Share screen, presentation mode. All right, can y'all see that?
Yeah.
Arlen? Okay,
Yes. Yeah. I can see I can't see the small scripture on the side.
done that again. Yeah, I don't know why it does that sometimes on y'all's end. I don't know, but anyway, I'll read through. We're in First Kings chapter 6, starting with verse 14.
Okay.
Starting with verse 14. So Solomon built the house and finished it. This is the temple, by the way. He lined the walls of the house on the inside with boards of cedar, from the floor of the house to the rafters of the ceiling. He covered them on the inside with wood, and he covered the floor of the house with boards of cypress. He built 20 cubits of the rear of the house with boards of cedar from the floor to the rafters. And he built this within as an inner sanctuary, as the most holy place. So that's the Holy of Holies, where the ark would be stored. The house, that is, the nave in front of the inner sanctuary, was 40 cubits long. Now that comes to about 60 feet. The cedar within the house had carvings of gourds and open flowers. All was cedar, no stone was seen. Now remember, they had cut the stones from a quarry from a ways away and brought them in and stacked them. That way there'd be no work being done in the temple proper. So they've covered all the stone, even though it was foundation of stone, it was all covered with cedar, and we'll find out gold too. So,
Is that because it's prettier or?
well, they wanted the best, and so the stone created the foundation and the walls, but everything else was used for adornment. Yeah. The cedar within the house had carvings of gourds and open flowers, all of cedar and of stone was seen. The inner sanctuary he prepared in the innermost part of the house to set there the ark of the covenant of the Lord. The interior of the inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, so about 30 feet, 20 cubits wide, and 20 cubits high, so 30 by 30 by 30. He overlaid it with pure gold. He overlaid the altar with cedar. Solomon overlaid the inside of the house with pure gold. Then he withdrew chains of gold across in front of the inner sanctuary and overlaid it with gold. Next, he overlaid the whole house with gold in order that the whole house might be perfect. Even the whole altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary, he overlaid with gold.
They finding gold in this area.
Well, remember, David had prepped all that, but yeah, just melt that. There's a lot of conjecture as to where it might have come from. But if you keep in mind that all of the booty that they had got from all these conquests and things, they stored in the tabernacle. They stored in the armory, which was located in the tabernacle. And so this just kind of went carrying with it. But from the Exodus, they had taken some of this stuff. As remember hearing when they were leaving, God told them, take whatever the Egyptians give you, and they were giving them gold and silver and everything they could think of. So
Stop the play.
to leave.
Oh, okay.
But yes,
They paid him to leave.
they paid them to leave. Yeah, and well, then Pharaoh did. There's a whole story behind that. So the chain, they need your chains of gold across. Now, in some, and we might get into it. I can't remember if there or not. In some places, it says lattice work, but basically, it is this idea. The chains would be just another visual reminder that this is the Holy of Holies, that this is the place for God. This is a separation between the divine and the human. So just giving you kind of a visual there with chains.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Except for the high priest who could enter once a year. In the inner sanctuary, he made 2 cherubim of olive wood. So they're made out of wood, each 10 cubits high. So that's about 15 feet. 5 cubits was the length of one wing of the cherub, and 5 cubits the length of the other wing of the cherub. It was 10 cubits from the tip of one wing to the tip of the other. The other cherub also measured 10 cubits. Both cherubim had the same measure and the same form. The height of one cherub was 10 cubits, and so was that of the other cherub, so they're 15 feet high. He put the cherubim in the innermost part of the house. The wings of the cherubim were spread out so that a wing of one was touching the one wall, and a wing of the other cherub was touching the other wall. The other wings toward the center of the house were touching wing to wing. He also overlaid the cherubim. Here's olive wood that's gilded with gold too. He carved the walls of the house all around about with carved engravings of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. Some will say pomegranates. In the inner and outer rooms, the floor of the house he overlaid with gold in the inner and outer rooms. For the entrance to the inner sanctuary, he made doors of olive wood. The lintel and the doorposts were 5-sided. So that is kind of a neat understanding. They're 5-sided. So you've got a base, you've got two that kind of stick out here. I mean, if they're equidistant, we don't know, but two that kind of stick out here, you got two that kind of stick out here, and then or that meet at the top. Now, the understanding of this is it was wider like this from the floor, and then like this, you got a wider point kind of 2/3 of the way up, because when they bring in everything, remember the cherubim on the ark, when they bring in the ark, there's got to be room for those wings and the cherubim to fit through. And so it's amazing. It's just conjecture, but it's kind of the prevailing thought is why it was built 5-sided, because 5-sided is not an easy thing to do. How do you keep that plumb? So he covered the 2 doors of olive wood with carvings of cherubim. Hey,
Good morning.
palm trees and open flowers. He overlaid them with gold and spread gold on the cherubim and on the palm trees. So also he made for the entrance to the nave doorposts of olive wood, 4-sided each. So in front of this 5-sided opening, he's put 2 doors. And 2 doors of cypress wood. The 2 leaves of the one door were folding, and the 2 leaves of the other door were folding. He carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, overlaying them with gold, evenly applied upon the carved work. He built the inner court with 3 courses of dressed stone to 1 course of cedar beams. That basically means that the stone was 3 times as thick as the wood that was put on it. So if each board, say, was a foot thick, you'd have 3 feet of stone that was with it. So you'd have a 4-foot thick wall.
Wow.
Okay, right. Yeah, there we go. In the verse 37, in the 4th year, we're going to be flipping back and forth between 2 Chronicles 3 and 1 Kings 6 and 7 here in a moment. So, in the 4th year, the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid in the month of Ziv. In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, the house was finished in all its parts and according to all its specifications. He was 7 years in building it. So this means that he started it in year 4. He was king for 3.5 to 4 years, and then he started building it. So now it's interesting. 7 years in building the temple. Look at the very next verse, which is the first verse in chapter 7. Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished his entire house. So he spent twice as long on his own palace as he did on the temple. That should be a sign of things to come. Okay. And now they describe his palace. Verse 2, he built the house of the forest of Lebanon, 100 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. So 150 feet long, 75 feet high, and or wide, and 45 feet high. Built on 4 rows of cedar pillars with cedar beams on the pillars. It was roofed with cedar on the 45 rafters, 15 in each row, which were on the pillars. There were window frames in the 3 rows, facing each other in the 3 rows. Now you notice there's always these 3 rows, 3 rows, 3 rows. If you read the beginning of verse 2, the name of this particular part of the house was the Forest of Lebanon. He had set up pillars. This says 45 rafters. So we're assuming, we're assuming about that there would be a pillar for each rafter. So he has set up this room to look like a forest. with these pillars. All the doorways and doorposts had four-sided frames opposite facing each other in the 3 rows. He made the Hall of Pillars. See, there's the Hall of Pillars now. So in addition to the forest, now he's got a pillar room, 50 cubits long and 30 cubits wide. There was a porch in front with pillars and a canopy in front of them. He made the Hall of the Throne, where he was to pronounce judgment, the Hall of Justice. And you hear that and you think of Superman and Batman and all those things. Covered with cedar from the floor to the rafters. His own house, where he would reside, in the other court back of the hall, was of the same construction. Solomon had also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken in marriage. Remember, in that first 3 years, he had taken a wife from Egypt. So he made a house just for her that was the same size as his own. Well, his palace complex is a group of homes, a group of houses. All these were made of costly stones, cut according to measure, sawed with saws back and front, from the foundation to the coping and from outside to the great court. The foundation was of costly stone. Oh, sorry, verse 10. The foundation was of costly stones, huge stones of 8 and 10 cubits. So 12 feet by 15 feet were the size of these stones.
That's a big house.
It's bigger than these tables.
That's big stone.
You're right. There were chapter 7, verse 11. There were costly stones above, cut to measure in cedar wood. The great court had 3 courses of dressed stone with 1 layer of cedar beams all around. So had the inner court of the house of the Lord and the vestibule of the house. Now King Solomon invited and received Hiram from Tyre. He was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali. Some translations will say Huram or Huram-Abi. So he was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali. So his mother is a Jew, whose father, a man of Tyre, his father is from Tyre, had been an artisan in bronze. He was full of skill, intelligence, and knowledge in working bronze. He came to King Solomon and did all his work. So he has received a person from the city, from the king of Tyre, with either with a similar name. And then we've got some comparison there. They're pretty much the same, all intents and purposes. He cast 2 pillars of bronze. 18 cubits was the height of the one, and a cord of 12 cubits would encircle it. The second pillar was the same. Now it's funny because here in verse 15 it says that they're 18 cubits high. In 2 Chronicles it says they're 35 cubits high. The 15 is the more correct translation. It's believed that the chronicler, the person who compiled Chronicles, either doubled, these were either like 17 and a half cubits high and he mistook it, or he intentionally embellished it. Correct. Yeah. Remember, the Chronicles was written from a Southern Kingdom point of view, a Judah point of view. And so he's going to want to make Judah look great. So excuse me. Okay. Verse 16. He also made 2 capitals of molten bronze that set on the tops of the pillars. The height of the one capital was 5 cubits, and the height of the other capital was 5 cubits. So that would make each pillar 20 cubits. There were nets of checker work, that's that lattice work we were talking about, with wreaths of chain work for the capitals on the tops of the pillars. 7 for the one capital, 7 for the other capital. He made the columns with 2 rows around each lattice work to cover the capitals that were above the pomegranates. He did the same with the other capital. Now the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars in the vestibule were of lily work, 4 cubits high. The lily is a big deal in Jewish thought process and in their religious aspect. The lily it represented life. And this ain't the first thing this ain't the only thing we're gonna see that was associated with the lily.
Isn't it big in Catholic thing too?
Well, yes, yeah, it's definitely an Easter thing.
Yeah.
It's called, Christ is called the Lily of the Valley. Lily plays a very big role in Jewish culture when it comes to, standing for life. Where there's lily, there's life. Let's see, anything there? Oh, yeah, I wanted to say, in the military, flag poles. That capital at the top, you know what they call it on a military post? The main flagpole on a military post, they might have 100 flags on a military post, but there's one main flag. They call that ball at the top of that flagpole a truck.
A truck?
A truck.
Yeah.
And the truck, inside the truck, it is, well, not inside the truck, but that main flagpole, it's rumored, I never saw it, but every person I ever talked to that was in any kind of at that main flagpole, buried on the north side, three feet north of the flagpole, there was a box buried 3 feet down that contained an American flag, an additional American flag, a gun, and 30 rounds of ammo.
Really?
And it was to protect the flag at all costs.
That's awesome.
So,
It's not just on the military soil.
Army post, that's what I know. That's what I was in. I can't speak for the other branches, but that's what I've always been told.
Cool.
But yeah, they call that, instead of a capital, they call it a truck. I don't know why. Thank you. I mean, I'm okay now. Well,
Might not be, I mean,
yeah, maybe. Baptize myself. Okay, so on to verse 20. The capitals were on the 2 pillars and also above the rounded projection that was beside the last work. There were 200 pomegranates in rows all around, and so with the other capital. For the record, pomegranate is a Jewish. It's the Jewish thought that the forbidden fruit was a pomegranate. That's one concept, but pomegranate means birth. It's a representative of birth. So you could say life, but remember the lily is life. Pomegranate would be birth.
all those little seeds.
Yes. And so with the other capital, verse 21, he set up the pillars at the vestibule of the temple. He set up the pillar on the south and called it Jachin. And he set up the pillar on the north and called it Boaz. Oh, y'all remember that name, right? On the tops of the pillars was lily work. Thus, the work of the pillars was finished. Now, when I was researching this, if y'all remember, I gave a sermon on Ruth, a sermon series on Ruth a few months ago. And I mentioned that Boaz it didn't have a meaning. The name didn't have a meaning. Researching through this, for some reason, they have given the name Boaz the understanding of in strength or strength. I don't know where that came from. It's a guy called Dadlin who has come up with that, and I don't know much about him. So just giving you that understanding. Jachin is a Hebrew word that means it is established. So the fact of 2 pillars, rabbinic tradition has that these 2 pillars were meant to represent 2 pillars that led them out of slavery, which would represent the pillar of cloud and the pillar of flame. So anyway, what it is, that's why I got a question mark besides Boaz. I will trust that it doesn't mean that somebody has just attributed meaning to it in order to give it significance. And then in 2 Chronicles 4, just one verse there, he made an altar, because this ain't in the First Kings text, okay? That's why I put it this way. He made an altar of bronze, 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 10 cubits high. And I make that distinction because in a little bit, you're going to hear about an altar of gold. So, back to 1 Kings 7, verse 23. Then he made the molten sea. It was round. The molten sea, or the sea. It was round, 10 cubits from brim to brim and 5 cubits high. A line of 30 cubits would encircle it completely. Under its brim were gourds all around it, each of 10 cubits. Surrounding the sea, there were 2 rows of gourds cast when it was cast, meaning they were this was a solid structure. They were not molded together afterward. They were built all together. So this was one solid piece. Interesting. I don't see it written there. I think I wrote it on the next one. It stood, I did. Okay. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea was set on them. Now, this is in addition to those gourds that were collect water that run over the sides. Okay, you'll see why they run over the side. The hind quarters of each were toward the inside, so you wouldn't see the bull's butt. Okay. Its thickness was a handbreadth. Its brim was made like the brim of a cup, like the flower of a lily. It held 2,000 baths. Now, interestingly, in the Second Chronicles 4, it says it held 3,000 baths. Now we've got an issue here. The 2,000 is more than likely when we do the math using pi, 3.1415, 916. It comes to about 11,500 gallons. Now, the problem with that is that when you use 2,000 baths and we use what the rabbinical tradition is for that, pi comes out to equal about 3, like 3.0. And so there is a question among some critics that say, well, this couldn't have happened because none of it adds up. What I will say is, for a people that probably did not understand math very well, coming close, some out of 3 is quite close. So I'm just saying that some of these may be estimates. When they filled it up, they would have figured out how much water. But I don't know how to. I don't know how to clarify that. I have what's written. I go with what's written. I trust that what's written is. But mathematically, it doesn't come out to 3.141. 1 Kings 7. He also made the 10 stands of bronze. Each stand was 4 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, and 3 cubits high. So 6 by 6 by 4.5. This was construction of the stands. They had borders. The borders were within the frames. On the borders that were set in the frames were lions, oxen, and cherubim. On the frames, both above and below the lions and oxen, there were wreaths of beveled work. Each stand had 4 bronze wheels and axles of bronze. At the 4 corners were supports for a basin. The supports were cast with reeds at the side of each. Its opening was within the crown, whose height was 1 cubit. Its opening was round, as a pedestal is made. It was 1.5 cubits wide. So that would be 27 inches.
How long again is a cubit?
About 18 inches. We use the estimate of 18 inches, depending on whether it was a regular cubit or a long cubit.
So 1.5.
Yeah, 27 inches is what this would have been, a little over. At its opening, there were carvings. Its borders were 4-sided, not round. The 4 wheels were underneath the borders. The axles of the wheels were in the stand, and the height of a wheel was 1.5 cubits. The wheels were made like a chariot wheel. Their axles, their rims, their spokes, and their hubs all cast. I know some of this is a little boring, got to get to the boring stuff, get the good stuff. But I have learned that, if something gets that way, got to read further in order for it to make sense. So I find this very important because they went into so much detail. It has to have some significance, some importance.
It's like all the genealogy. It's like, when you're reading it, but it does have significance. It's very important, but it's hard to get through.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Verse 34. There were 4 supports at the 4 corners of each stand. The supports were of 1 piece with the stands. On the top of the stand, there was a round band, 0.5 cubit high. On the top of the stand, its stays and its borders were of 1 piece with it. On the surfaces of its stays and on its borders, it carved cherubim, lions, and palm trees, where each had space, with reeds all around. In this way, he made the 10 stands. All of them were cast alike, with the same size and the same form. Boy, that Hiram Abi is a pretty handy guy. 1 Kings 7. He made 10 basins of bronze. Now, Second Chronicles 4 adds in which to wash, okay? Each basin held 40 baths. Each basin measured 4 cubits. There was a basin for each of the 10 stands. He set 5 of the stands on the south side of the house and 5 on the north side of the house. Second Chronicles 4 adds, in these they were used to rinse what was used for the burnt offering. The sea was for the priests to wash in. So that big giant bowl that we talked about earlier, the priests actually would crawl in there, and that was what they would use to bathe and purify themselves. Okay, some additional stuff from Second Chronicles 4. You don't have to turn there, it's just a few versions. He made, and this is not included in the First Kings things. He made 10 golden lampstands as prescribed and set them in the temple, 5 on the right side, 5 on the left. He also made 10 tables and placed them in the temple, 5 on the right side, 5 on the left. Those tables would be used for the showbread. And he made 100 basins of gold. He made the court of the priests and the great court and the doors for the court. He overlaid their doors with bronze. And then back to the Kings, 1 Kings 7, end of 39. He set the sea on the southeast corner of the house.
Is the water that was like continuously refilling? You think you have just this big bowl of water, you guys.
Very.
Fast
That
after
is
a while.
That is a very great question. Water, it was not present in this area of town, but yet there was water used for purification. Remember that Gihon Spring? The Gihon Spring, which is just outside the city walls. That's where Solomon was praying back when his brother Adonijah had tried to usurp. The Gihon Spring has this this understanding that it was more like a Yellowstone. What's the word I'm looking for? Geyser. That it would gush forth at times, but other times it wouldn't. They set up some kind of cistern or trough, well, not cistern, but some kind of reservoir that would allow the spring of Gihon. When it rushed forth, it would fill the areas that they need. But remember those gourds and the basins that were on the side, they were all built together, it was all one frame. Those were used to collect the water so it didn't rush out everywhere. So I'm sure there probably was a mess at, in some degree, because the altar would have had a little thing around the base of it, maybe at the top too, but mainly around the base to collect the blood and things like that. But definitely, yeah.
I don't know about Jewish culture, but the Muslims, when they purify themselves before they pray 5 times a day, it has to be in running water. They can't use still water. There's this underground thing in Istanbul, that's water, but they can't use it for cleansing.
When we get further on, when we get into post exile, when Ezra and Nehemiah, when they come out, they talk about building the temple. They will actually talk about a river runs through the center of the temple. Now that could be, because this is the Game of Thrones, it can have a contemporary context at that point, or it can have a future context, an eternal context at that point. It could be talking about right then, it could be talking about the temple in eternity. When we get to that,
There was some kind of exchange.
Yes,
Transference.
correct.
Speaking in terms of the New Jerusalem,
Yes. Verse 40, we're almost done here. Hiram also made the pots, the shovels, and the basins. So Hiram finished all the work that he did for King Solomon on the house of the Lord. The 2 pillars, the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars, the 2 lattice works to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars. Don't you love how they do that? The 400 pomegranates of the 2 lattice works, remember there were 200 on each side. 2 rows of pomegranates for each latticework to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the pillars, the 10 stands, the 10 basins on the stands, the 1 sea and the 12 oxen underneath the sea, the pots, the shovels, and the basins, all these vessels that Hiram made for King Solomon for the house of the Lord were of burnished bronze. Now, I will say that this plays a large role for those that have come out of exile. Second Chronicles is believed to have been written after the exile, or compiled after the exile, using the kings and all these writings, using the same source. This would have played a role because when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem, they sacked the temple and they stole most of these things. Some of those things that were found prior to them, or as they were coming back from Babylon, Cyrus and Darius gave them those items to take back. And then they found some others that were still in the temple. So each one of these things plays a very large sympathetic role in their lives. These things were part of the temple of God. And so anyway, yeah, like I said, just the detail, all the little details have a very big significance.
Do you think one man really did that much work?
No, he probably led a group of people, but he had the experience. He was kind of like a contractor. Verse 42, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 lattice works, 2 rows of pomegranates. Did I read that already? Yeah, I read that. Okay, 46, sorry. In the plain of the Jordan, the king cast them. So this is in the plain. So this is outside the city. In the clay ground between Succoth and Zarethan, Solomon left all the vessels unweighed because there were so many of them. The weight of the bronze was not determined. Now that's actually a sign of stewardship. Okay. So Solomon made all the vessels that were in the house of the Lord, golden altar. See, there's that golden altar. We didn't hear anything about that. The golden table, we didn't hear anything about that. Heard about 10 tables for the bread of the presence. The lampstands of pure gold, 5 on the south side, 5 on the north, in front of the inner sanctuary. The flowers, the lamps, and the tongs of gold. The cups, the snuffers, basins, dishes for incense, and fire pans of pure gold. The sockets for the doors of the innermost part of the house. The most holy place, and for the doors of the main hall of the temple, gold.
Would a fire pit be made out of gold when gold melts? It's pretty soft.
Yeah.
I go with what it says.
Yeah.
Thus, all the work that King Solomon did on the house of the Lord was finished. Solomon brought in the things that his father David had dedicated, the silver, the gold, and the vessels, and stored them in the treasuries of the house of the Lord. And then I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. Because it went into 2 Chronicles 5. I'm sorry, I thought I had one more verse. So 7 years on the temple, 13 years on his own palace. Everything's finally done. He's in the 24th year of his reign at this point. So we've just gone through 20 years of building in 3 chapters. 2 chapters.
Let me ask you, Michael, they weren't consecutive? The 13 and the 7?
Yeah, they were considered. They were not in conjunction with one another. They were back to back. He worked on the temple first
Okay.
in his house.
So they weren't working on his house while they were working.
Correct. No, temple came first.
That verse that you read about them casting it on the plains,
Mhm.
that has a lot of credence in people who are familiar with molding. And in clay, glass,
Mhm.
and stuff like that, and that they probably carved the pattern into the plane and laid the casting in.
Interesting, very interesting. Yeah, I would add that the possibility existed that the clay it would have stayed wet there. If they tried to haul it in, it would have dried. Maybe I don't know, but great ad there. So next week we got the first worship service in the new temple. And it's interesting because we see these 5 things: a dedication, which for our worship service would be a call to worship, a speech, a sermon, prayer, prayer, a blessing, which for us would be a benediction, and sacrifice, which would be our offertory. You could add the communion in there as well, but for this purposes, it would be their offering. So yeah, I look forward to that, and we're through with the cubits for a little while. You don't have to hear those words anymore. Hey, Arlen, are you still there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and end the video real quick.
Okay. Yeah, you just got less than a minute, 2 minutes.
Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and stop it.
Okay.
Y'all have a good day.
We'll see you in church.
Okay.